And this is our 14th lesson on the study of the flood. And we're using my book. We're in chapter 5, and we should finish chapter 5 tonight. And we'll start with chapter 6. We'll break for Christmas holidays, and we'll break for the holidays and start back the 18th of January. Now, tomorrow night's class will start on the 19th of January, the Romans class. Okay. We're looking at some additional problems that atheists have. I've been laying out a number of problems that they have with their system. Now, let me lay this out. We did this last class period. We showed the erosion of the continents. We cited two sources. I'll go back to them and cite them again in just a moment. But if the continents should have eroded to sea level in less than 34 million years, there should not be any fossils older than 34 million years. All the fossils should have eroded away. All right? Now, the continents should have eroded to sea level in less than 34 million years. Therefore, we shouldn't have any fossils older than 34 million years. So I think they have another problem. This is another serious problem. Another thing here, Judson made the statement, and we read it in the last class, but Judson stated the geologic record indicates that this has never happened in the past. There is no reason to believe it will happen in the geological foreseeable future. That is, everything go down to sea level. Furthermore, at the present rate of erosion, the continents, which now average 870 meters in height, in elevation. Now, for those in the United States, a meter is about 3.28 feet. So multiply it by about 3.28, and you'll have it about, and you'll have the average elevation of the continents would be reduced to close to sea level in about 34 million years, according to Judson. So they would be eroded down to sea level. That would take care of all your mountains and take care of all your fossils that were less than 34 million years old, right? Kennedy states, and all of these are documented in my book, the fourth problem and he lists a number of problems that the geologists have, that of the long lifetime of continents and mountain ranges is perhaps the most difficult of all. The rivers of the world strip tremendous quantities of rock debris off the continents each year and deposit in the oceans. The great rivers are steadily wearing down their basins. At this rate, all the land mass of the world will be eroded to sea level in something in the order of 10 to 25 million years. Now, I chose the 34 million years in my argument, but Kennedy claims 25 million. So let's go back. I used 34, the biggest figure, but that's still ridiculous. There's no way that it can be anywhere near 34 million years old because it would have eroded down to sea level otherwise. Any questions or comments? Any fossils around that are more than 34 million years old? Either. All right. Now, here's your 34 million years. It's in the tertiary period from 1.5 to 65 million years. According to their dating system, we're right in the middle, right in here. In fact, it's probably just about the middle, 65, 70 would be, 35 would be the middle. So 34 is pretty close to the middle of that period. And that's supposed to be on the time of the last dinosaurs. We shouldn't even have dinosaur and the other things in the fossil record. It should be gone. It should have been eroded away. Shouldn't be there. But there's there. Very interesting. If there should not be any fossils older than 34 million years old, then there should not be any dinosaur fossils. Why? Well, your dinosaurs supposedly were down here at least 65 million years ago. Most of them are 140 million years ago, according to their dating system. Right? There shouldn't be any dinosaur fossils. There should not be any fossils older than 34 million years old. Therefore, there should not be any dinosaur fossils. Of course, there are dinosaur fossils. So that means there's something wrong with their dating system. We also noted in our last lesson that continental shelves don't have enough sediment on them to have been flowing for millions of years. Continental shelves should be a lot bigger than they are, but they're not. Okay? That's the problem. And even the atheists recognize that. I want to go back to a file. I put some additional information in it. What I had here was, we had this right here, and we had the Paleozoic, and I'll show what it is in just a minute. But it goes from 542 to 252 million years. Now, you know, they put precise numbers in here, and their whole system doesn't have that kind of precision. I remember when I studied physics, you didn't carry out your number. If you had two significant figures in your data, if you carried your answer out to three significant figures, I remember one physics professor just counted wrong, okay? And it was making a point, and it was a good point. You don't carry the data out any further than your information. If I took your age and said, how old are you? I'd say, I'm 50. And I said, okay, I'm going to multiply 50 by 365 and a quarter days. And I'll get exactly how many days old you are. I said, but I rounded my age off. I'm 50 years and a half, so you're going to be off 200 some odd years. See, you'll have an error because you made an assumption based upon a rounded number. And they're putting precise numbers like this. Their system doesn't measure anywhere like that. These numbers are put there to make you think they got precision when they don't have it. All right? They just don't have it. Paleozoic, paleos is old in Greek. Zoe is life, old life. Paleozoic, Jurassic, Tertiary, and Paleozoic. Now, wait a second. We have the Paleozoic, the Jurassic, Tertiary, and the Paleozoic. Now, the Paleozoic goes from this period of time right here. And so it's on top and on bottom both. So let's look at how this fits right in here. Let's look at here. The Paleozoic is this region down in here, this whole time right in here. So what do they got? They got Paleozoic first, Jurassic, Tertiary, and Paleozoic. Paleozoic on top, Jurassic, Tertiary, and then Paleozoic again. Well, that's really messed up. Paleozoic, Jurassic, Tertiary, and Paleozoic. They got the Paleozoic on top, and the Tertiary, and then they got the Jurassic, and they got the Paleozoic next. So the Paleozoic is on both top and bottom. That's interesting. The Paleozoic would be some of this down in here. Now, so they don't specify. It's probably a mixture of these things. Here's probably what it is. All right. Here's the one that I did get this bottom one backwards that I told you I did, but I corrected it so we could see it again. The Eocene, this is the Matterhorn, has what it has is the Eocene, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. All right. It should be Eocene, Cretaceous, Jurassic, Triassic. And so it's about upside down. Eocene's in the right place. Triassic, Jurassic are backwards. Cretaceous should be up here. So Cretaceous should be second, it's bottom, and Triassic, Jurassic are upside down too. So it's got Eocene, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. Eocene here, what do you have? Triassic, Jurassic, then Jurassic, and then what was next? Cretaceous, I think, was next, wasn't it? Yes. It's all jumbled up. It's just jumbled up like you wouldn't believe. And how did this happen? Well, it could happen very easily if their whole system is flawed. I think their system has to be flawed here, if that's the case. All right? But your Eocene fits in here, right here, about roughly 50 million years ago, between 25 and 30 million, between 25 and 50 million years ago. All right? Here's new material for us now. So what channels the natural selection? Now, they're talking about what causes organic macroevolution. It is channeled like the course of skiers on a hill slope by environmental pressures, subtle or lethal, that become extinct when they fail to adapt to changing conditions. Now, they say oxygen was an early forcing factor. The idea they have is the early Earth didn't have free oxygen. It didn't have O2. It had mostly carbon dioxide and methane and other gases. And so oxygen was an early force, considering the primordial anoxic. Now this is the word alpha. It's an alpha privative in Greek. And so it's no oxygen. And so on is not. No oxygen Earth, anoxic Earth. After its waters became otherwise receptive, the biologist reconstructs a likely scenario in which the first minute anaerobic beings were something like bacteria. Now, anaerobic, the on is derivative in the new for those that have studied Greek. So it's no oxygen. So this lives without oxygen. That's what that means, anaerobic. We're going to use that term repeatedly throughout this course later as we develop this. Minute anaerobic beings were something like bacteria, that's cloud, and it continues on the next slide. When one of them came to produce and then tolerate O2, and after the many early O2 sinks were sufficiently neutralized by the combined forces of photolytic and photosynthetic O2, the nucleate cell arose. Sexuality began, and eukaryotes flowered, and O2 rose in levels high enough to meet metazoan requirements. Cellularly diversified, many-celled animals appeared. Boy, they just jumped out of space and declared, probably from different protozoan ancestors introduced in the Phanerozoic eon. Now, I want you to see something here. They say organic evolution can't occur today. Why? Because oxygen, O2, won't let it happen. So they had to have an anaerobic atmosphere with no oxygen and no free oxygen. Didn't have O2 in it, or didn't have very much O2, because it would kill something that was trying to occur. Okay, so it tends to kill things. Bacteria doesn't like a lot of free oxygen. You give it a lot of oxygen, it doesn't like it. It needs some carbon dioxide. It's a plant. Now, what's he saying? He's actually talking about evolution. Now, they use the word evolution, but it's actually macroevolution. Macro. Macros is the Greek word for wide or large. Mikros, is the Greek word for small or tiny. So what we have here, microevolution. I believe in microevolution. It's comparatively minor evolutionary change involving the accumulation of variation in populations used below the species level. I don't think they accumulated them. I think what I would disagree with this, that they began with those variations when God created them. And those variations are reducing. And so we have less variability now than we did 1,000 years ago in both humans and all of our plants and animals. In other words, they have not accumulated, they've actually lost since the creation. Right? Any questions? So I would not agree with the accumulation part of it. Right? But what happens is, due to various changes in the animals' environment, some animals can survive. The polar bear, he has survived because of certain things about his genetics, and he can survive in cold weather. And he's got several factors that will help him to survive. But the polar bear is not suited for other places in the world because his genetics won't let him survive very easily. Okay, any questions? He can't hunt like a brown bear can. They're bigger than brown bears, but if they get, I've watched on shows, if they get together, the brown bear can whip the polar bear because the polar bear gets hot too quick. He's made to keep his heat in his body. He gets overheated, and he can't fight with the brown bear, even though he's bigger than the brown bear. Macroevolution is evolution that results in relatively large and complex changes as species formation. Now, whenever the atheist talks about evolution, he will mix these two together and use them interchangeably. That's not honest. All right, that's not honest. Here's what happens. Ropp, he's an atheist. He admits this, but we're not sure whether or not we can extrapolate this process of microevolution and explain the larger scale events of microevolution. He's honest enough to say we don't know that microevolution proves macroevolution. And he's admitting what's really the case. If God created, then macroevolution with all of the genetic diversity, and then the animals can adapt to their environments. And that being the case, what we have is whenever it adapts, it probably loses some of its diversity, genetic diversity, when it does that. I think people started out, and the difference in the colors of skin and eye color and hair color and other factors are factors that helped us to survive in different locations of the world. God made us that way. I see the wisdom of God in it. And to me, it's beautiful because God made it that way. Atheists equivocate. Now, that means they change the definition of the word when they use instances of microevolution to support claims of macroevolution. They just use the word evolution and use them both interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable. That's not honest and not rational. All right. The systems, let's look at what must be supported by logical fallacies, are lame. And so whenever they use a logical fallacy of equivocating, using the word in two different ways, and then trying to bring them through interchangeably, that's a logical fallacy of equivocation. When you have to equivocate to support your system, that shows that your system is weak. It's not a very sound system. Now, let's look at some effects of the flood on the earth. Again, if you have any questions, stop me and ask me. Since water has a weight of about 60 pounds per cubic foot, that's 9,810 newtons per cubic meter, or 1 kilogram of mass per cubic meter. That would be at the right temperature. Of course, it does change if the temperature changes a bit. One would experience pressures of over 1,200,000 pounds per square foot, or 59,800,000 newtons per square meter. That's the kind of pressure you'd have at depths of 20,000 feet, or about 6,100 meters, 6,096 meters. And so that's the kind of pressures you'd have just from water. Now, if you had sediment in the water, it could almost triple the weight of the weight of the water of a given volume of water. Increase it maybe up to as much as 150 pounds per cubic foot instead of 60 pounds. And we have that would give us 24,500 newtons per square meter, per cubic meter, when it's solidified into rock. Now, what does this do? It gets a lot of pressure. When a submarine goes down deep, it experiences the stress on the hull of the submarine due to the pressures. And so a submarine can't just dive in any depth because it'll crush it. The pressure will. If you've ever gone down deep in the water, down to 30 or 40 feet down, you can feel the pressure on your body. You can just feel that pressure. 32 feet, I believe it is, doubles your pressure, if my memory's right. The weight of several million pounds per square foot on the rocks, on the sediment, would create coal. And so we're going to show that from the plants in the sediment below the water. The pressures would bring about the formation of petroleum and natural gas in a matter of days instead of years. I want to show experiments that have been conducted that show that to be the case. So we've been told for many years it took millions of years for petroleum and coal to form. That's not true. We're going to show it's not true. And so we're going to give documentation of it. Now, let me point out, if you put something under pressure, it heats up. As, for instance, a gas, if you put it under pressure, it tends to gain temperature. Temperature goes up. We won't get into the physics of it, but it does happen. And basically, you're pushing the molecules close to one another. They start hitting one another, if you think of it that way. Kinetic energy then is transferred, and that's changed to heat. And so we get heat rated. There is a relationship. And of course, we're told it takes heat and pressure to make coal and natural and gas and oil, rather. Several million years, Larson said, and imperfection in the carbon cycle have given us coal. Yet Guaymas and his colleagues at Argonne National Laboratory, I think that's in Illinois, but I can't remember, have taken less than 1 year to prepare a thoroughly characterized synthetic coal. The material they produce is indistinguishable from the real thing by all techniques so far applied to it. What does that tell you? In the lab, they made coal in less than a year by just putting it under pressure. They just took material and put it under pressure and made coal, and I can't tell it from regular coal. That tells me it didn't take millions of years to happen. So we've had laboratory proof that it does not take millions of years to produce coal. So that's shot down, that old theory. You say, well, it took millions of years to produce coal, so the Earth has to be millions of years old. This is not true. We've proven it otherwise. That Argonne, Guaymas and his colleagues proved it. Okay. Now, radiocarbon is carbon-14, and we're going to talk about that later. But radiocarbon dating of the oil from this and nearby areas. Now, this is hydrothermal oil. And so we have oil and we're going to show where this is. This is off the Baja California in Mexico, in the Gulf of California, I believe. A radioactive carbon isotope dating of the oil. Usually the sites that do the radiocarbon dating won't even radiocarbon date oil. It's supposed to be millions of years old, but they did some of this oil and they found out they got dives 1630 and 1626. And the ages of their oil was 1.4 to 4.9 times 10 to the third years. 10 to the third is 1,000. So it's between 4,200 and 4,900 years. So that would be about the time of the flood. Okay, this oil was formed. Therefore, in Guaymas Basin, the overall time temperature conversion of sediment organic matter to hydrothermal petroleum takes place over a short geological timescale, less than, that arrow there means less than. When I would teach them algebra, I'd teach them that's an alligator. That's a big bite over here, a little bite over here. That's how I taught it. So that's your less than 5,000 years and commences under a relatively mild temperature condition. Doesn't have to be that hot. So this again is information. And they found this oil. Now, where did they find it? Okay, they did further tests on it. Gas chromatography, mass spectrometry data was compatible with predominantly bacterial algal, and so that's bacteria and algae, origin from the source organic matter, and suggests an adequate degree of maturation, so it matured. And so what we're having is they're measuring the energy due to the wavelengths of the lights, what that is. Every element produces a different spectrum of light. And we won't get into that, but it does. And so they can tell what elements they have there. And they've mapped the whole Earth for the various colors of various wavelengths of light with satellites. Okay. Now, where is this Guaymas Basin? This Guaymas Basin here is right here inside that red box. There's Mexico, United States, there's Baja, California. And so this is right here. This is a bigger blow up of it. That's right in here. There's where it is. And so we have here, it's on the west coast on the west coast of Mexico, between Baja, California and the main part of Mexico. Okay. That's where it's located. And here's another picture of it, a little bit better one, showing the mountain ranges and all that. There's Baja California, Norte and Baja California Sur. And we in Oklahoma jokingly say Texas is Baja, Oklahoma is what we say. Guaymas Basin, okay? So we have here, there's Sonora province in Mexico. All right, any questions? That's where they found this oil. Now, this is off Louisiana in the Gulf of Mexico in the United States. The core taken by Paul Smith off Grand Island, Louisiana, contained 106 feet. They cored down to 106 feet. That'd be 32.3 meters of sediment. Ages of 11,800 to 14,600, plus or minus 1,400 years, were obtained from the hydrocarbons extracted. And we're going to talk about the hydrocarbons that they use with the radiocarbon dating. We're going to talk about that and the problems with it. But they extracted this from these sediments, okay? And so that was a core taking. That's the hydrocarbons found in recent sediments there. All right. Now, they've actually taken waste, like cattle waste, like cattle manure, bovine manure, and the scientists at the U.S. Bureau of Mines Laboratory in Brucetown, Pennsylvania, have been exploring the production of fuels from agricultural waste in a pyrolysis. Now, puro is the Greek word for fire, and lucis is to loose. So this is to loose by fire or by heat. That's what that means. And so they heat it up and it looses it by fire, developed by the Bureau's Martin Schlesinger and David Wolfson. Bovine manure or other largely cellulosic waste material is heated to for about 6 hours at about 900 degrees Celsius. At this temperature, the material is converted to gas, oil, and solids, all of which can be used as fuel. In other words, in about 6 hours, they can make, with the right scenario, right temperature, they can create petroleum, gas, natural gas, and petroleum. Now, 900 degrees Celsius is pretty hot. But remember, I told you earlier, whenever you put things under pressure, they heat up. I don't know that they would heat up this much. But if you lower the temperature, it could produce it maybe instead of 6 hours, maybe in 6 weeks. But it can produce it. Heat along with this, the right amount of heat. And this is just 6 hours of heat. And I suspect what would happen is if you just lower the temperature, it would take longer for it to happen. That would be pretty reasonable. All right. Questions or comments? Okay. Research by Saxby and et al. And so forth produced petroleum about 6 hours of conditions designed to simulate conditions in a subsiding sedimentary basin with constant geothermal gradient. Now, gradient is a difference in temperature and difference in this case, geothermal heat at less than 300 degrees Celsius. Now, notice they're going less than 300 degrees Celsius. They were going 900 degrees Celsius. So there's a difference. The temperature changes. And so they lowered the temperature and it produced the Torbanite generated paraffinic crude oil and 35% yield, while the brown coal gave a wet CO2, that's carbon dioxide rich natural gas. In most respects, these experiments, which were possibly as slow as could be realistically planned within a human timescale, appear to have duplicated geochemical hydrocarbon generation. So notice they did lower the temperature and did it again with another experiment. And of course, the 300 degrees Celsius is quite a lot less than, what was it, 900? I believe it was, yes, 900 degrees Celsius. It was a lot less. And what they're saying here, and they duplicated this in the lab, and it would take, if they would have lowered the temperature, it could have done it, but it would have taken more time, and they wouldn't have had time to do it. And it might have taken 40 or 50 years to do it, or something like that. So down to maybe 200 degrees Celsius or something like that. So what they're saying is, if you read between the lines here, all you got to do is just lower this temperature a little bit. It'll just take more time to do it. So they produced They produce coal, and they produce natural gas. They produce petroleum, oil, and so oil, natural gas, and coal, all, and did it in short periods of time. So it does not take millions of years for this to happen under the right conditions. Any questions or comments? All right. Torbanite, and he did talk about Torbanite here, and Torbanite was mentioned here in this somewhere. Let me find it. Torbanite right here, where my mouse is moving around. He mentioned that. So it is a substance intermediate between oil, shale, and coal, and having a high carbon content and considered to be a type of boghead coal. And so it's between them. Petroleum was produced by the simulated conditions. This proved that it does not require millions of years to produce petroleum. So that's been shot down. We've taken care of that. We don't need to worry about that anymore. They've experimented and proven that it just does not take millions of years. I want to move on unless there are comments or questions. Thomas Gold theorized that methane gas is in the mantle of the earth and is converted into hydrocarbons, CH4, okay? And so what he theorized is, Thomas Gold won a Nobel Prize, and those don't, Nobel Prizes don't impress me as much as they used to, but he won a Nobel Prize, I believe, in astrophysics. But he theorized he's working over here in geophysics, is what he's working here. And he made this claim. And he died he was born in 1920 and died in 2004. So he died several years ago. But Gold was an astronomer born in Austria and educated at Cambridge and taught in the United States. Okay. But he had this theory, and it's been tested a bit and kicked around a bit, but he's gone now. Gold argues, and this is Nelson, that the Earth holds huge reserves of commercial-grade gas and developed not from the fossils, but from methane trapped deep within Earth's mantle since the planet formed. It therefore predates life on the Earth, according to him. Of course, he's probably an atheist, old Earth creationist at the very low worst. So what he is, he takes the Earth to be billions of years old, of course. But this is an interesting theory that says it was not formed by hydrocarbon. That is, it wasn't formed by plants and animals decomposing. Now, let me point out, they've come up with a new theory that there are actually organisms deep in the earth that live at very high temperatures, down like 2, 3, 4, 5 to 10,000 feet down in the rocks. And they think they've got evidence of it. This is something new, that this produces oil and gas, and they actually produce it as they're feeding on the rocks and the temperature, and this is what keeps them alive. And that's so that they think there's an endless supply of petroleum because of that. Any questions? That's something new, and I'm not going to go into it any further, but it's something that's being kicked around right now. Evans gives a summary of the latest research being conducted on Gold's theories on pages 112 through 114. All right. Now let's go to the curse that God gave to Adam and Eve. Unto Adam he said, behold, he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree, which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In toil shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee. Thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken. For dust thou art, and to dust shalt thou return. So you're going to die. You're going to have to toil now when you labor to get your crops. But the ground is cursed. So there was some kind of curse of the ground that happened at this time. Now, Genesis 5:29, and he called his name Noah. So this is Noah's father, saying, the same shall comfort us. So Noah's name carries the idea of comforting in our work and in the toil of our hands, which cometh because of the ground which Jehovah hath cursed. So the ground had been cursed at that time because the Lord had cursed it. We don't know what the curse was. I'm going to give you some ideas what I think it was. Okay. But what we see here, there was a threefold curse. God cursed the ground. Man was to toil to eat of the ground, and thorns and thistles were to be brought forth. So there's three things involved in this curse. Now, it may be the thistles made them have to toil. It may be that the ground being cursed made him have to toil. But there's threefold aspects of it here, right here in this passage. Thorns and thistles are very interesting plants. Many of them, a large number of them, produce what's called allelopathic phytotoxins, which inhibit the growth of other plants. Interestingly enough, some plants, when their leaves fall on the ground, they won't let other plants grow. That's very interesting. We're going to give you several of these. Now, then this allelopathic, and right here, this is from allos, and that's those of the same nature, pathos, and so that's feeling, and so that's kind of like the two of them work together. You feel for the other ones of your same nature. Sunflowers, notably, in this helii, helios is the Greek word for sun, and antis is annual. So it's anise. It's an annual sunflower, just lives 1 year, and then has 3 seed, produce an allelopathic phytotoxin, which inhibits seedling germination and seeding growth in some plants. So sunflowers, they produce this chemical that they put in the ground, and their leaves have it and their roots have it. And this chemical then makes it harder for some other plants to grow. So that's very interesting. And other plants can't grow as well. Now, suppose some of these plants, and some of these are like thorns and thistles, have this in them. Many thorns and thistles do. And so some of them then could easily have made the growing of other plants harder. And you have to weed them out. Now, walnuts, the American walnut, the black walnut, and genus Juglans produce an allelopathic toxin, a chemical that inhibits the growth of other plants called juglone. And so the black walnuts do. If you want to keep other plants from growing, just get black walnut leaves and scatter them out, grind them up, and put them on your soil, and there won't even hardly anything else grow there. It's a herbicide. In fact, they're using it and trying to develop it in some of these things into herbicides to use in fields instead of some of the chemicals they use. Production of these allelopathic phytotoxins would cause some weeds to reduce the production of some fruits and vegetables. Now, if that's true, then we got a problem. Now, these plants that produce this phytotoxins, allelopathic phytotoxins, frequently the phytotoxin will be in the roots. And so when you see a lot of in the New Testament and the Bible, they talk about having to pull things up by the roots. And so you got to root it out. And that's why. There's 2 reasons to root it out. And this allelopathic phytotoxins is one of them. And the other one is some plants will come back from the roots if you just cut the plant off at the ground level. Now, when I was younger, I worked in the cotton fields hoeing the weeds. Made 25 cents an hour hoeing weeds when I was about 12 years old. And I really got rich. I got increased to 50 cents an hour when I was about 14. And I worked 50 cents an hour chopping weeds with a hoe. And you kill them at the ground level, but some weeds will grow right back. So you got to go get them again. So it requires time to break down these allelopathic phytotoxins that are on the roots of the plants. Even after the plant dies, the phytotoxin that is produced may affect other plants even for several years. And so that gives us, Jesus said we have to root out certain things. God says root out some things. It's probably using that principle. Some error is affects people for generations. Here's a very interesting tree. It's an Australian pine tree. Notice the litter that's fallen on the ground. Do you see anything green growing around there other than the pine trees? Can anybody find anything green other than the pine trees that's growing? I can't find anything. I read about this and I was amazed. The pine needles kill everything else that wants to grow, and only let the pine trees grow. That's really the ultimate of it. That is really allopathic. Okay. Okay. That's in Australia. In Genesis 8:23, this is during the flood, or right after the flood, Jehovah smelled the sweet savor of the sacrifices Noah made. And the Lord, or Jehovah, said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake. There won't be another curse. I think there was a curse during the flood. I think the flood also cursed the ground. For that the imagination of man's heart is evil from its youth, neither will I again smite anymore everything living as I have done. So there won't be another flood. And of course, the rainbow guarantees that. But right here, I think he's saying that the ground was cursed whenever Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, and then it was cursed again during the flood. I think it was the second curse. It's likely this is the second curse of the ground because of Genesis 5:29. Let's look at Genesis 5:29 and we look at it. The curse of Genesis 3:17 through 19 we've already looked at in 5:29 may have been only partially fulfilled in Genesis 3. There's several possibilities. It's possible that the thorns and thistles were created by God in Genesis 3 and the ground lost its fertility in Genesis 6. That's a possibility. Might be other combinations. Another possibility is that the curse of Genesis 8:21 may be a second curse of the ground. And we would get that from Genesis 5:29. Still, another possibility is that the thorns and thistles were created in Genesis 1, but were created to optimize the post-diluvian soil conditions rather than the antediluvian soil conditions. Ante is before the flood. All right. Now, there's all kinds of possibilities here, but the thorns and thistles were a curse. We can see that you have a hard time getting them out because they're going to stick your hand when you try to uproot them. And also they have this allelopathic chemicals, phytotoxins in them, that makes your other plants not grow as well. And it choke them out too. They pull the nutrients and the moisture away from the other plants as well and compete with them for sunlight as well. So they're competing for moisture, for nutrients, and for sunlight. And that's all bad. And you want to get all that stuff out of your garden, let your garden grow. The last explanation is more reasonable, but I think it may be a combination of these. Okay. I think that we know God stopped creating on the seventh day, so I think that the thorns were around before. After He created, I think they were there on the sixth day. They were there. It helped account for the longevity. If the soil was cursed and it can't produce as well, and the things it produces won't have as much nutrients in them, that'll decrease the longevity of mankind. That would explain why the antediluvian man lived longer, because his soil was super fertile, whereas ours is not. That's the position I'm taking, and this is one of the factors that decrease the longevity of man, in my judgment. Okay. It would help account for the large size of antediluvian reptiles as well, because reptiles, they grow all their lives. They don't quit growing. Most of your mammals stop growing when they get full grown. All mammals don't. Elephants keep on growing after they mature. They continue to grow. So if an elephant were to live at 150 years, he would be quite a lot bigger than a 60-year-old elephant, right? Reptiles grow, and one thing about reptiles, they grow rings on their bones like tree rings, and mammals don't. So that you can tell the difference in their bones, right? So fossil bones, when they see them and have rings on them, they know it's a reptile. Anything that prolongs the life of a reptile will increase its size. So if you take what we call a little lizard called a horned toad in Oklahoma, I've seen horned toads that were about 6 or 7 inches long from their nose to the end of their tail. But if you let one of those live, say, 150 years, he might be 15 or 20 feet long. You let him live 700 or 800 years, he might be 30 or 40 feet long. And that he would look a lot like some of those dinosaurs. I think it's just very simple. These reptiles, we still have dinosaurs around, they're just little. They're not big. And that's all, that's where they've gone. They're still here, a lot of them are. All of them aren't here, but many of them are. Now, let's look at the timeline that the atheists use for the plant evolution. This is an interesting situation. They claim early in this period, Devonian period, there were early forms of plants evolved and then they kind of died out. Here's some other types of plants. And I've had one course in botany in college, and I can't remember all these names for this stuff, but it's not important to me right now. They're talking about the insects that feed on the plants and that they've supposedly evolved. So here, the various insects involved, some of them will pierce the plant, some of them would gall the plant, eat the leaves and galls. Then some of them would mine into the leaves. They would dig into the leaves, and some would consume the pollen and nectar. Now, over here, we have conifers right in here in this region, various ginkgos and other trees, other plants. But here's angiosperms. We're going to look at what angiosperms, supposedly angiosperms evolved right here in the Cretaceous period. And we're going to look at what the Cretaceous period is. But they started to evolve right here in this Cretaceous period, right in here. And so that's when they supposedly began to evolve. Now let's see what angiosperms are. Let's see here. According to Merriam-Webster, you get on the internet, just type Merriam-Webster and find this. An angiosperm is any of the class or division, and I'm just going to skip down, grasses. See right there? Grasses, oaks, roses, and so forth. I want to zero in grasses. Grasses are supposed to have evolved right in here somewhere. Grasses are angiosperms, and they're supposed to evolve right in here, around the end of the Cretaceous and the beginning of the Tertiary period. And that's the theory the evolutionists have. That's when grass came about, okay? So keep that in mind. All right? Now, the Cretaceous period, right in toward the end of it's right in here. That's when grasses supposedly evolved, right in there. All right, so they've been around 50, 60, 70 million years, supposedly. And the last of the dinosaurs are right in this region right here. Now, interestingly enough, and hopefully you're all in suspense what I'm leading up to. Here's a website for it, and here's the link for it. Dinosaur coprolates, and that's dinosaur dung species that has been fossilized in the early evolution of grasses. In other words, what they found dinosaur dung with grass in it. Wait a second, let's go back now. Wait, hold on a minute. I thought the grass is supposed to have come about right in here, but they found it in these big dinosaurs in their dung. Something wrong here after evolution of grass. And so this is a website. And again, if you're watching on the internet, you can pause it and write this down and look it up for yourself. All right. Here's another source for it, Science News. And here's the link to it as well. So, now, some of these websites you have to pay to get copies of the articles. I'm not going to pay for you to get a copy of an article. If you want to spend your $10 to get a copy, you can get it for yourself for $5, whatever it is. Right? So right here, grass was in the dinosaurs menu, but this is new. they've had to readjust the evolutionary cycle because they didn't think the grass existed until later after the dinosaurs were gone. Grass existed earlier than the atheists claimed that it evolved. They've had to readjust. Grass existed back in here when the dinosaurs were around. But that's a new idea. They thought it came about right in here. That's when they thought, oh, because it's in the dinosaur diet. Maybe their whole dating system is flawed. That's my thinking. We've run into all kinds of evidence that their dating system is flawed. There's fossil evidence. Now then, what do they say here? Let's go back. They say, yeah, there were little bitty mammals around, but they were like chipmunks, not very big, right in this period, right in this period, right in here. And so they finally started coming out and breaking out in here. Then they got bigger and bigger by evolution. And so there weren't any mammals, any big mammals in here. Well, lo and behold, they've had to change something now. In fossil evidence, there were large meat-eating mammals that ate dinosaurs in the early Cretaceous period, supposedly 130 million years ago. Here's a link for that. They found a fossil mammal with a dinosaur in his stomach. He had ate it whole. Okay, now it wasn't real big. It was about the size of maybe a wolf or something like that, but it wasn't real big. It wasn't a huge one like a big lion or tiger. But they found that plants and land animals were killed in the flood, see? So right here, now you can get your link, and you can actually go to this site and see a picture of it, okay? But it's not a real big mammal, but it's something new, and that they had to change their thinking on it. But they have now fossil evidence of it. Let me summarize this, and we'll be through. Plants and animals were killed in the flood. And when they were killed, they were fossilized and put in the rock, and their minerals and building blocks, so the minerals and elements that are part of the building blocks of life, were then frozen in that rock, and they're lost to other living organisms to be able to use them. So we lost it. So the fertility of the soil decreased when these building blocks were fossilized. Large amounts of organic debris were buried in the sediment. That's your coal and other things, and it has many of the building blocks alive in it. Extensive erosion occurred in the short period of time. We've already seen this, okay? The earth was repopulated with land animals and men from the ark. There were inverted strata in the geologic record in the sedimentary rocks. We've seen that. There were extensive gaps in the geologic record. Now we saw that as well. And we have gaps in there. We mentioned that, and I want to run back through and show you one other thing before we quit. Dinosaurs ate grass millions of years before it was supposed to have evolved. Let me go back to this one of these right here, and I want to show you something. What we found in several of these, and we didn't just take everything. There's a lot more time places where we have the inverted strata, but we may have something with tertiary rocks, and then the Triassic, and there's a gap. These other ages in here are not even present. And if you go back and look at all the information we had, there's a lot of gaps in there. Where did all this rocks go that were between them? When we had one that had the tertiary, and then it skipped down to the Jurassic, where did the Cretaceous rocks go? And so we have a lot of gaps in there, and that's a problem for the atheists too. We're just going to keep multiplying troubles for the atheists. I believe atheism has serious problems, and I don't believe it can be sustained. And do you have any questions before we stop? Okay.